Last month, the United States and Germany turned President Volodymyr Zelensky's birthday into a historic day for Ukraine. It was on the 25th of January that US President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Scholz announced tanks for Ukraine's armed forces. But Zelensky's shopping list is expansive. After tanks, F-16s are top of the agenda. And now the momentum to greenlight the fighter aircraft for Ukraine seems to be building up. With depleted strength and dated aircraft, the Ukrainian Air Force is struggling. The Ukrainians fly Soviet-era jets like Sukhois and MiGs. The country's current fleet of warplanes is older than modern Ukraine itself. Western aircraft may be the shot in the arm that Kiev needs. The Ukrainian Air Force feels F-16 is the best option. Airfields across the war-hit country are already being prepared in anticipation of fighter jet deliveries. Not just in Ukraine. The clamour to approve F-16 jets is growing in other parts of the world as well. In the Polish capital, Warsaw, activists protested in front of the hotel hosting President Biden.
Mr. President, dear Mr. Biden, please send F-16 to Ukraine! F-16 to Ukraine!
F-16 to Ukraine! F-16 to Ukraine!
Back in the United States, bipartisan support for Ukraine in the Congress remains intact. On Tuesday, while visiting Kiev, here's what the Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee said.
I will be a very strong voice on both the ATACMS, the long-range artillery to hit the Iranian drones in Crimea, in addition to the F-16s.
However, it's not just about deliveries. Many analysts say fighter aircraft will not be a magic wand. In Ukraine, fighter jets are complex platforms and need intensive training, which could in fact last many months. Ukraine will also need logistics and maintenance systems in place. Kiev fears Moscow is preparing to mount a new deadly offensive in the spring. With weapons, soldiers and specialized equipment, Russia and Belarus have beefed up their joint military grouping. The time is running out as the Russians continue their fight to seize Donbass in the east, the industrial heartland of Ukraine. For more on this, we're now joined by Dov Zakhem. He is the former Under-Secretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration and is currently the Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks so much for speaking to WION. Now, the clamour for F-16s is growing, not just in Ukraine, but across NATO countries. So the million-dollar question is, are the F-16s coming Kiev's way? And are these fighter jets likely to be a game changer, as Ukrainians seem to think?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think they will get the jets. It's clear that, as you say, and as viewers have just seen, the clamor is growing. The Ukrainians certainly, I think, could train up pretty quickly for these jets. After all said and done, it's going to be pilots who are who will be the ones who will train up. And I think that if we look back at some of the other systems that the West was reluctant to pass along on the grounds that it would just take too long for the Ukrainians to train, every single time, literally every time, the Ukrainians have been able to train far more quickly and field these systems than people had anticipated. And if you heard Chairman McCall, he wasn't just talking about jets. He was talking about the long-range artillery, the ATACMS. And quite frankly, that's as important as the jets in the sense that this is still very much an artillery war. And as several veterans who have either fought the Soviets or whose parents fought the Soviets, have pointed out to me, when you have artillery and you have the artillery tubes and you've got the range, you can wipe out entire brigades pretty quickly. ATACMS is a very powerful system. And remember also that it would work in combination with F-16s, because F-16s aren't just air-to-air systems to knock out other jets. F-16s are also air-to-ground systems, which means that they too would go after Soviet land formations. Or rather Russian land formations. I guess that was a Freudian slip on my part. And so I would argue that the combination that Chairman McCall talked about, ATACMS and F-16s, I think would have a devastating effect on, after all, what are Russian recruits, criminals, all sorts of people who really, many of whom really don't want to be in this fight at all.
All right, you believe that this could actually have a devastating impact on Russian forces. But of course, as we know, F-16s are not tanks or artillery systems. They're complex, require extensive training, logistical support, maintenance systems in place. And we don't know how long it'll take for Ukrainian pilots to actually be trained to operate these. However, let me ask you a different question. How do Russian...
Yes. But before you do,
yes.
Don't make the assumption, as I said, that it'll take very long for them to train. Remember, these are accomplished pilots, number one, who've done quite well with what they've had. Second of all, you don't send aircraft anywhere without the maintenance support, that is to say, the integrated logistics systems. There are, of course, F-16s all around Western Europe, so that any country could send a logistics system to support a given F-16. And so the maintenance, I don't think, is an overwhelming problem. The logistics, I don't think, is an overwhelming problem. The benefits of having the F-16s far outweigh the difficulties that people imagine.
So then let me ask you this. How do Russian Sukhois fare against F-16s? And also, what kind of a reaction is Moscow likely to have if and when NATO does deliver these much sought-after F-16s to Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we know very well that the Russian systems, even the Sukhois, are not as capable as F-16s. After all said and done, if the Russian systems were as capable, then by definition, the Ukrainian pilots wouldn't have any trouble getting into the cockpits of F-16s. So I think this would give Ukraine a significant advantage. As for the Russian reaction, I don't know what more the Russians can do to react. They're not going to go nuclear because a nuclear war would devastate Russia. I don't think that's particularly what Mr. Putin wants, and certainly not what his generals would want. And so he's doing everything he can already to make life miserable both for Ukraine and, to the extent he can, for the West. I don't know that any more threats that he makes will have anything behind them. And quite frankly, I do believe that we've recognized that we should not deter ourselves. And that's pretty much what we've been doing. We've been deterring ourselves as much as Mr. Putin has been deterring us.
Right. Now, of course, it's hard to understand what exactly the Russians were celebrating today in that packed stadium where Putin made almost a Bond-like entry. But let's not forget, the first anniversary of this war is just 2 days away. How is it going to pan out in the days ahead? We will have to wait to find out. But Dov Zakem, thanks so much for sharing your perspective with WION.
Thank you for having me.